Recently, I've shared a lot of before and after photos online showing this texturized effect, and that's got a lot of people asking me how I edit these photos and give them a more artistic and painterly quality. Well, in this video, I'm going to walk you through those exact steps that I take so that you can start applying this technique to your photos as well. So why would we even want to add textures to our photos? Textures can really help enhance the visual appeal of our photo. They allow us as photographers and artists to add layers of interest to otherwise flat and lifeless areas. A clever addition of textures can help us to evoke different emotions in the viewer and also deepen their sense of visual appreciation. And for me personally, I really love how the addition of painterly strokes to our photos can imbue them with a more artistic and painterly quality. So this whole edit is being done with a texture library that I've built for myself over many years of traveling the world, collecting and curating those texture images. But if that's something that you want to do as well, I've got a few pointers for you. Firstly, take your camera everywhere you go, because you'll be surprised, you'll find textures in the most unlikely places. Now, point number 2, when I say take your camera everywhere, I'm referring to this kind of camera, not your phone. Reason being, you want to have the highest quality texture possible, because when people zoom into your photo or you print it large, you don't want that texture looking pixelated or falling apart. So highest quality possible. Point number 3 is to try and photograph your textures in the shade or on an overcast day. You don't want harsh shadows in your textures. Point number 4, as a general guideline, is you want to photograph and process your textures with approximately a mid-exposure. That means that when you use blend modes like overlay and soft light, you're not actually affecting the brightness value of the underlying photo, you're only going to be introducing the texture itself. And point number 5 is that you want to photograph your texture in a way that you have an even brightness across the frame. You don't really want to be building in a vignette into the actual texture itself. I separate my textured vignettes out separately so that I can add in a vignette when I want, or leave it out and I just want the texture on its own. Textured vignettes are a really great way for not only controlling the brightness value around the edge of the frame, but doing it with a really nice aesthetic quality as well. And incidentally, the bundled textured pack I've put together, I've also included for free my textured vignettes in that pack as well. You can of course get some free textures online, but I would just be mindful of this because I've taken that route myself before, and sometimes you might have some green leaves or pebbles or something and lovely texture, but then when you actually put them into your photo, it's just not really very practical. It's like, why am I adding some pebbles all over my photo? It doesn't make sense. So when you're looking for your own textures, I'd strongly recommend you look for things and elements that you genuinely want to add into your photo that you think will elevate that work. So for me, I love that painterly quality, and that's why I've worked hard to try and capture a lot of paint strokes, canvas textures, things like that. So photograph the things that are going to be relevant and you think will be useful to use as textures. But I just want to point out this tutorial is not software specific. So as long as your photo editor supports layers and blending modes, you'll be good to go. So Photoshop, Affinity Photo, On1 RAW, any of those will be great options for using this technique. Okay, so here we are in the catalog view in Luminar Neo. And I'm going to be working on this misty lake photo taken in New Zealand. And this is going to serve as a really good example for our demonstration, because textures show up best in flat areas. They're great for adding in detail and interest into those shadows and highlight areas where there's not much else going on. So if you have a really busy photo, it's hard to actually see the texture. So this is going to be great. So we're going to go to the edit section in Luminar Neo, and all we want to be doing to add a texture is come to the left hand side where you see the layers option here, and the plus icon is going to allow us to add in a new layer. Already you can see my images and I have several textures loaded in, but that's just because I've been playing around with them already. You want to click the plus icon and then in your browser window navigate to where you have your textures saved. These are part of my artisan texture pack, but I also have other texture packs in here as well. My painterly textures will serve as a good example for this. Let's just start with this texture right here because it's going to be easy to see what's going on. I've opened it up, but currently we don't see any change to the photo, and that is purely because it's just been loaded into the palette over here. So we see the little thumbnail, we can click that, and once we do, we see that texture dropped over the top of our photo, and that is currently with an opacity of 50%. So the opacity is just another word for visibility. So the visibility is now at 100, and so all we see is the texture, and we can drop it down to 0, and now we see the underlying layer. So I'm going to double click that, which will reset that to 50%. So we're seeing half and half of both of those layers. But in order to get our texture layer to interact with the layer underneath, we need to work with blending modes. Now, it may seem complex to start with, but it's really not. It's really easy. I'm going to explain it thoroughly so you'll fully understand it. So to access the blending modes, we want to come to the Layer Properties panel here. So we need to open that if it was already closed, and you do that just by clicking on the Name tab up here, and we come to the drop down that says Normal. These are our options for changing the blending mode. And as I move over these with my mouse, you can see how that texture is now interacting differently with the photo underneath. For now, I'm just going to choose overlay, and I'm going to push the opacity very strong. We're going to go all the way to 100 so that we can clearly see the texture interacting with the photo underneath. And now I just want to point out a couple of useful options we also have. One is to flip the texture horizontally, the other is to flip it vertically. And if your texture doesn't actually fill the screen when you bring it in, let's say you have a low resolution texture, and one option is to actually grab the sides and stretch this out, but a much quicker way is to either fill the screen with the texture, you can also stretch it to fit, or choose fit. Any of those options are going to be good to work with to make sure your texture fills the frame entirely. Now, when I add my textures, I always feel that a little goes a long way. I would rarely be introducing a texture with an opacity above sort of 25, 30. Usually I often go even lower than that. And what that allows us to do is actually layer up one texture on top of another, and we create a kind of visual feast for our viewer to enjoy. Because that's what we're trying to do, is utilize these textures to just add visual interest to those otherwise flat areas. So let's add another texture. I'm going to come over to the plus icon one more time, and this time I'm just going to click one of the options that I already have loaded in my palette, and we can push the opacity to 100% so that we can clearly see what the texture actually looks like. We've got a lovely rich texture going on here with paint strokes and other interesting things going on, and that's what we want, visual interest. So let's explore these different blending modes and see what they actually do for us. And they're all categorized. The first three, before you hit this break line here, these three are all designed, darken, multiply, and color burn, designed to darken the photo when the two layers interact. The next two, lighten and screen, are designed to lighten when these layers interact. The following three, overlay, soft light, and hard light, they are designed to add the texture with contrast. And then these two here, difference and subtract, they are comparative. So they are looking at the differences between the two layers. Now, don't worry if that all seems a bit confusing at the moment, because I'm going to go through each of those blend modes in turn so you fully understand them. But if you are confused, you're not sure what to do, I would recommend overlay and soft light are two excellent blend modes for adding textures to your photos. So that will start you off in the right place, but moving forward, it's really, really powerful to understand all of the modes. Currently, you can see when I actually change the blend mode, not only are we introducing texture, but also color information as well. And that might be what you're after, but let's say for simplicity's sake at the moment, it's not. We just want to focus on the texture. Well, it's no problem. We can open up the color tool here, and we can just grab the saturation, which represents how much color is in it, and take that to 0. And we have now desaturated that particular texture. So if we hide this layer, I'll go hide, we can see the underlying effect of what we'd already created. And now if I show the layer, we're seeing the addition of the texture only, no more color information. So in multiply mode, what's happening is the texture that we've put over the top of our photo, each of these pixels is being multiplied against the photo that exists underneath. And so by multiplying the two together, we're actually getting a darkening effect. So I can just drop that opacity because, like I said, 100% is way too strong. A little goes a long way. So what we could do is just, put that around 27. Let's zoom back out. And we also have the option to say we don't want to apply a texture through the entire frame. We can use masks to reveal it only where we want it. But I think I'll get to that shortly. Okay, let's look at another blend mode, and I'm going to open up a brand new texture. And this time I'm going to add one with a bit more color. So let's go for this crazy firestorm one. And I must have already had that in my palette. So it asked me if I want to replace it. Just say yes. And now we're going to crank the opacity all the way to 100 to see what we're introducing here. Okay, so we've already looked at multiply, which is that darkening effect. But what about color burn just underneath? So multiply and color burn are very similar, except color burn, as well as darkening the photo, it's also intensifying the color. You can see the difference between just multiplying that effect in and then burning it with more contrast and intensity. And I really like this option. So this is color burn, and then we could just drop the opacity again. And you can see how all of a sudden we've gone from a washed out faded blue to being able to introduce a very, very different looking color. Now, I don't feel that this is actually a very good interaction with this particular photo, but you get the idea of what color burn does. So let's move on and look at one of the lightening options. Lighten itself and also darken, they're very specific uses, and I will come back to those a little later. But for now, let's just have a look at screen. Screen is basically doing the opposite of multiply. They work in a very similar way, except whereas multiply is multiplying the pixel values together, creating a darkening effect, screen is actually doing the same, except it multiplies the inverse value of the pixel. Sounds complicated, but as long as you know that screen is lightening up those pixels in a really nice subtle way, then that's all you need to know. So you can see now that we are introducing this texture in screen mode, and you can see how that works and interacts. Now, this particular texture that I've introduced is just not working with this photo, and that happens all the time. And that's one of the things I love of working with textures. It's such a creative and exploratory process that you just throw a texture on there, see what works. If it doesn't work, no problem. Just throw that layer in the bin and try something else. So let's do that now. Let's throw this in the bin, remove the layer, come back to the plus icon, and we'll just find a completely different texture. I'm going to jump into the papers and background textures. These are really good for working with portraits and dropping those into the back of portraits. Nice and subtle, but very artistic textures. So if I click on this and we crank the opacity up so that we can actually see the texture itself, and I'll zoom in, and you can just see that it has a subtle canvas weave to help give that substrate look to this. And I'll just click to fill that into the screen. And now let's come and explore some of these other blend modes. So we just looked at screen before, which is really nice. Now let's move on to these contrast-driven blend modes. So overlay, soft light, and hard light. Super, super powerful blend modes, and probably my favorites. So overlay gives us a lot of contrast with that interaction between the two layers. So if I hide that layer and then show it, you can see how that texture has been added with a really nice blend. Obviously, we don't want to be as heavy-handed as 100%. We can drop that down. We also have the option of soft light. And with soft light, if you just remember that it's like overlay, just a little bit more refined, it's not as in your face, then that's all you need to know as well. Side of that is the option of hard light. So if I choose hard light, that is like overlay, but with a little bit more aggression. So it's amplifying those colors, making them a bit more contrasty. So that texture itself didn't have much color in it, but if it did, it's intensifying that color as well. So before and after, as I'm just dropping that opacity slider. And again, we can just find somewhere within that percentage amount that we feel looks nice, looks subtle, looks refined. Okay, we'll go with 20. Okay, let's add another texture and we can look at the comparative options. So we'll just go for another paper, seeing as that's open. This one's quite a nice one. Let's crank the opacity. Yeah, I really like this texture. It's got some nice impasto paint strokes and also a little bit of canvas showing through. So this will be a really nice one to integrate as well. Okay, so let's have a look at the comparative blend modes. So we've looked at the brightening ones with screen, the contrast with overlay, soft light and hard light. And now we have difference and subtract. To be honest, I don't use these two options particularly often, but it's good to know they're there and also worth playing around with to get a feel for what they can add to your photo editing. I haven't really mentioned hue, color, or luminosity because, again, for our purposes of adding textures, they're not particularly useful. But let's say we wanted to go for the subtract mode. Of course, 100% is far too much, and we could just sort of tickle this in and it's going to help to darken that down. So there we go, there's another texture added. I'm going to close the layer properties down and let's just have a little look at the before and after, before and after. So that's the basics of how you add textures to your photos and get the two layers to integrate together. But currently, I'm not really happy with how this is looking. It was more for demonstration purposes. So let's see if we can't add some more textures and actually give this photo a little bit more life and a bit more of aesthetic appeal. So for this one, I really think that adding more painterly textures will benefit the look of this image. So let's go for this one here. I quite like this. Adding that canvas weave is certainly going to help give it a more painterly quality. And let's see which blend mode is going to help us with this. And I'm thinking adding more contrast is what we need at the moment. So let's go for the overlay option, hide the layer, and then show it again. And I think this is helping us in the right direction. Maybe that's a little heavy-handed. So that's a nice canvas texture added. What about those paint strokes? Well, I'm going to jump into my texture bundle and I'm just going to open up the painterly textures and choose the horizontal versions. And I'll just have a little flick through these to see which one I might like to use. Now this certainly has a lot of interest, so I'm going to go for this option and see how that looks. Okay, let's change the blend mode again. How's overlay, soft light, or even hard light? Okay, it's pretty extreme, but I'm going to go for hard light in this option, and I'm just going to drop the amount. Let's go somewhere like that. Now, one thing we can also do is start to work with the color, but do that by using textures. So let's open up another texture. So I'm going to open a more neutral texture that actually has some color in it. So I'm going to go for this one here, give this a try. Click on it to load it up, and I'm going to crank the opacity all the way to 100. And now watch this, I'm going to go to overlay, and straight away we've changed the whole color and therefore the feel of this photo. So let's hide this layer, and then I'm going to show it again. And you can see huge difference. But one thing I don't really want to do is add the texture from this particular image. So how would I go about removing the texture and just using that colorization? Well, it's quite easy. All we need to do is just blur this image. So in Photoshop, you've got the option to blur. In Luminar Neo, we have the blur tool. So we just go into Creative, choose Blur, and now just crank that amount. And just like that, you saw the texture disappear. So there you go. Now we just have the color from that texture layer. So if I hide it and then show it, you can just see that we've been able to recolor this photo. Now here's a good tip. If you ever feel like your edited version with all the textures has gone too far and you've got away from that original, don't feel like you've got to go into each individual layer and drop the opacity. What we can do is duplicate the original layer, drop it on top of our layer stack, and then change that blend mode to something that's going to add back a bit of contrast. So let's do that now. I'm going to come down to the original photo layer. I'm going to select that, right click, and duplicate the layer. Now currently that will make absolutely no change because it's still sat at the very bottom of the layer stack. So what I need to do is drag it all the way to the top and then release. And so now we can see our original photo again, and that is showing us just how far we've come with that textured version. So show the layer, we see the original. So what I'm going to do is use the original photo, but switch the blend mode to either overlay, that'll add contrast, or soft light, which adds contrast just with a little more subtlety. So hide it. Okay, we've got all our texture, but looking a little washed out. And now let's show the addition of that original layer in soft light. Okay, I think that looks much better. One of the issues we've got with this photo at the moment is that in the shadows, they've dropped really far towards black. And so we're not seeing that lovely rich detail that adding textures actually allows us. So what can we do about that? Can we specifically pinpoint a texture only into the shadows? Well, yes, we can. And we can do the same with the highlights as well. I mentioned before the special use case scenario for the darken mode and the lighten mode. That's where they come in. And we can not only use it for adding texture, but also use it for adding color into the shadows and the highlights as well. So let me show you how we do that. And let's change things up. I'm going to jump into the grunge textures and let's just go with this first option here. That looks like quite a nice texture. Yep, so this is what we're going to add into the shadows only. So I need to click the texture, which will load it over the top. And there we go. I'm going to crank the amount all the way to 100 or the opacity to 100. So to add this into the shadows, we don't want to darken. That's going into the highlights. We want to lighten. And what's happening here is anywhere that the underlying photo is darker than the layer we've introduced, we are going to see this new layer. So basically it's a way of changing what the shadows look like. Obviously we don't want to be doing that with 100%, but we can just start to ease this in and you can see how it's affecting these shadows. Now we've got texture in the shadows, but we don't need to settle just with the color that this was. As you can see, it's got this kind of, I don't know how to describe that color. It's got a color to it. Let's go into the color tool in Essentials, color, and now we can actually change the hue of that. So if I grab this slider on the hue and I start changing this, you can see that we can affect the overall color of those shadows. So let's say I wanted to make it more bluey purple, we could absolutely do that. If we wanted to add saturation into it, we could absolutely do that too. Currently at 100%, this is pretty ugly, so we don't want to be doing that. We can bring this all the way down to 0 and just start easing in very, very lightly until we're happy with it. Now let's do the opposite. Let's add some color and texture into the highlights. So we're going to go and add another texture. I'm going to come out of the grunge textures and this one, let's go for artisan again. Open this. And it's the texture I'm interested in, not so much the color, because as you've seen, we can change the color. So I'm just going to add this in and we're going to change the blend mode, not to lighten. This time we're going to come to darken. So as you can see here, darken is just introducing that into those highlighted areas. And I'd like to see a warmer color in those highlights. So let's come to the color. Again, grab that hue shift slider, and as I move that around, you can see how we're affecting that color. And if I sit that somewhere around there, that's added just a little bit of a yellow toning. Okay, yellowy orange. We can go with that. And again, I just want to drop that opacity down. I don't want it to be too obnoxious. So we have a photo that is now texturized and looks a lot more painterly. But to finish this off, I want to color grade this photo. Now, if you're doing this in Photoshop or another photo editor, you're able to just color grade on top of this stack. However, the way Luminar Neo works is any adjustments we make apply specifically to a given layer. And I'm hoping that at some point we will have a merge down feature in Neo, but it's not there yet. So there's a little workaround we need to do to actually color grade this as a whole. So let me show you that, and that'll be our final finishing step. So we just need to export this photo. So I'm going to jump to the catalog view. I'm going to right click and I'm coming to export. I'm going to export as a 16-bit TIFF file. So we have loads of rich data in there, everything we need just to finish the edit. And I also have a location set up, a brand new folder called temp, specifically for sending these temporary files to. So we'll hit export. And now if I jump into the temporary folder, we can see that I have access to this version. And now you can see in the layer stack, we have no additional texture layers. This is a flat image. So any changes we make with any tools is going to affect only this layer. So for example, we could add some accent AI if we wanted to. That's starting to enrich those colors already. If you feel that it's getting a little too texturized with that accent AI filter being added, we can always balance that out by adding a little bit of negative structure. Another tool that you guys know I love is the mystical filter, because that just softens up any photo we're working on, but does it in a really nice way with some additional contrast as well. That's far too much. You guys know that. But look, it shows you what we can do with it. About 30% is quite nice before and after. But the main thing I wanted to do here was some color grading. And I've shown you many, many different ways that we can color grade on this channel. But one of my absolute favorites, which could seem a little daunting to some people, but it's with the curves tool. Because what that allows us to do is to work with individual channels. So I'm going to actually introduce some blue into the shadows. Did you see that? As I bring the left-hand point up, that is introducing blue into the shadows. I'm going to leave that quite high just so you can see what's going on. And consequently, the opposite, if we bring down the highlights, we're saying take blue away from the highlights, and that just leaves us this lovely, rich yellow. Now, this is far too extreme for what I'm after, but we can do that with a little bit more subtlety. If we put a point in the middle as well, we can control the midtones. So we can make this a more blue image overall, or we can start to introduce just a little bit of that orangey warmth. We've also got access to the red channel so that we could increase that red look if we wanted to, or pull it away and give it a calmer, more green look. And of course, we could do an adjustment on our final bit of contrast as well. Sometimes I like to just lift those shadows up ever so slightly while still keeping contrast in our image by adding a trusty S curve. So now if we come down to the before and after slider, we can review that colorized change. So on the left-hand side, we can see the texturized version that we created before. And then on the right, we have a color graded version. Looking at this again, I've decided I actually want to add a little bit more of a warm color to this. So I'm going to add this texture right here. We're going to go to soft light, and that's certainly adding in a lot more warmth. Let's try flipping this round. Okay, I like flipping this as well because it's adding a brighter side to the right hand side, which matches in with our photo. Maybe I don't need that much intensity. Okay, let's just have a little hide of that. That was before, and now let's add that layer in again. Okay, a bit more texture, a bit more life with the color. I'm happy with that. Okay, it's just about time for my favorite bit, which is the before and after. But before I do that, I just want to say, if you do like the look of these textures, I worked really hard on these. These are the result of 6 years of me traveling around the world, collating and curating my favorite textures, whittled down from thousands to a selection of 240 textures in one bundle. And you are able to get that with an 80% discount at the moment for a limited time. I'll put a link in the description. But like I say, you can get your own textures as well. So this might not be the best example of adding textures to a photo, but I just wanted to use this as an example so that you can learn the process. It's the process that's important, and then you can apply this technique to your photos as well. Right, let's take a look at the before and after. Well, hopefully through this tutorial, you've been able to see the benefit of adding textures to our photos and how we can actually give them a more artistic quality. And if turning your photos into paintings is something you like the idea of, I've put together that video right there that's worth checking out. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, you can do so by clicking the AT right there. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, leave me a like and a comment. That would be much appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now. Take care.